meeting. I'd like to extend a special thank you to our Programs and Seminars Committee for arranging this virtual event, and also to our annual supporting partners for making this event possible. Just a friendly reminder to please put your audio on mute for the benefit of our attendees. If you have any questions during the program, please feel free to use the chat feature and we'll address them throughout the programming. I'd like to extend a big thank you to everyone for joining us today. As I know most of you may still be working from home, and we appreciate your continued involvement and support. So our goal during this time is to continue the BOMA mission and maintain our usual programming with these virtual events. So we also thank you for being flexible and encourage you to stay apprised of BOMA news and information, especially now as BOMA has its finger on the pulse of all industry relevant information as it pertains to our local mandates, including state and federal guidelines. Please visit the BOMA website if you haven't done so already and stay on top of this important information. As we carry on in the year with our theme, Your Future in Focus, I'd like to highlight that today's guest speaker and topic is incredibly important to our future as it can have a tremendous impact on our industry. The split roll tax measure, which will appear on our ballot in November, if passed, will significantly raise taxes on business property, which will ultimately get passed on to not only our tenants, but consumers in the form of increased costs on just about everything people buy and use, including things like groceries, fuel, utilities, daycare, and healthcare, just to name a few. And today, we have the honor of hearing from Rex Hime, the President and CEO of California Business Properties Association and our legislative advocate for BOMA, California. He works on our behalf in Sacramento on just about every issue at the state level that affects commercial real estate. And may I add that this isn't Rex's first time at the rodeo when it comes to fighting taxes on our industry. He's helped create the coalition that stopped the threat of split roll tax several times. He's advocated for us on just about everything, including ADA reform, rent control, climate change policy, building codes, and countless other issues. I've also had the pleasure of attending the annual real estate summit that his team puts together in Sacramento every year for BOMA leaders and other real estate leaders throughout California. He always puts together an outstanding lineup of guest speakers for us, including top policymakers and state legislators. He does a
We lost Amber for just a second, so I'll just go ahead and finish up that thought. Rex is awesome. We will turn it over to him to start now.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here today and meet with all of you. I've always loved coming to San Diego BOMA events, but the sad part of it is I don't get to come to San Diego. But I get to be as close as I can, and it's always great to be here. So I get to talk today about split roll tax. So I thought I would go and give you a little bit of background and history and whatnot, because probably most of you on this call were not even around or able to vote when Prop 13 passed in 1978. So in California, since the state was formed, the Constitution of California has always had all property taxed the same way. Whether it was residential, agriculture, commercial, it didn't make any difference. It was always taxed the same way. In 1978, there was a lot of stuff going on. Most terribly was that actually people were being forced out of their homes. They would pay off the debt on their home, and then they would get a new tax bill from the assessor, and it'd be so much that they couldn't afford to stay in their homes. I know that sounds like outrageous activity, but it was actually happening back in those days, because the assessors, all they would do is drive around and say, you know what, this house ought to be worth this, this building ought to be worth this. So a group came together, Howard Jarvis and Paul Gann, and they put forth a ballot measure, which was on the ballot, called Proposition 13. And what it did very simply was say, here's how California is going to tax property henceforward. You buy a property, that becomes your base. Then you take 1% of that, and that becomes your base tax. Now that 1% can be increased up to 2% every year thereafter. So if you bought a $100,000 home, you paid $1,000 in taxes, and then that could go up $1,002, $1,002.50 the next year after that. But you knew exactly what you're going to be paying. When you sold it, it would start a whole new process again. And that's what we've had in place since 1978. There's been a lot of talk about how this process has resulted in less funding be available, et cetera. Well, the only thing that has consistently grown in California without ups and downs, but rather was a continual growth, has been the property tax in California. It's been the mainstay of those who are in the receiving end of it. So it has not been an issue. But what is split roll? Split roll says we're going to separate different types of properties. We're going to keep residential on one side, and we're going to put business and commercial properties on the other side, and we're going to set up a different system whereby they'll be taxed. And that's why it's called a split roll, because instead of having all properties taxed one way, they are going to be separated. So let's talk about the two measures that want to create split roll tax. And you're saying, well, why are there two measures? In 2017, a group of progressive organizations started circulating a petition to create split roll tax. They were trying to get on the 2018 ballot. They did not get enough signatures on time to get on the 2018 ballot, but the way the law works in California, you have a certain time with which you can continue to get signatures, and you can then be on the next ballot. So they continued getting signatures, and then they qualified to be on the 2020 ballot, which is the one we'll be voting on in November. However, there was a flaw in this first measure, a flaw for the proponents, because it only provided money for poor school districts, not for all the school districts in California. So the education community said, wait a second, we all want a piece of this pie. You need to go back and do a different measure. So a second measure is circulated, and it has now qualified, and it is also set to go on the ballot for November. In California, a ballot measure can be withdrawn up until July something before the election. We anticipate that the first ballot measure will be withdrawn, and we'll be voting on the second ballot measure. Well, how are they different, and what's the process that we're going to have to face in November? Well, first off, they corrected the flaws. So now all school districts will get a little bit of money instead of just a handful of school districts. Secondly, in both measures, it's a $12 billion tax hit. Now, take that into account. That isn't just a one-time $12 billion tax. For property owners, that's a $12 billion tax hit year after year after year. So it's really much larger than $12 billion. 40% of that $12 billion goes to schools. 60% of it goes to local government. The measure itself does not say how that money is to be spent or provide any direction whatsoever. So most observers believe that the money that is created by this measure won't be going for classroom size or teacher salaries, but rather will be going to backfill pensions. Certainly the local government money will be going to backfill pensions. And that's why the two major proponents of this second measure are the California Teachers Association, or CTA, and the SEIU, or Purple Shirts, Service Employees International Union. So those are the backers. There's a couple other things that are different about the second measure, which are important to all of us. First, it does something which by law, we actually created this 25 years ago. We passed a law in California, CBPA did, which made it set the system whereby if you appealed your property tax assessment, the burden of proof was on the assessor. This measure, should it become law, turns out on its head, and the burden of proof is on the private property owner. So instead of government having to prove that they're right, you have to prove that they're wrong. So you can imagine that it has a significant impact on the ability of us to be able to be successful in that appeal process in the future. Another thing that it does is this. In the first measure, it alluded to the fact that if your property was being used for any type of business, it could in fact be deemed by the county assessor to be a business property. So if you had an in-office home in your home office and you were taking a tax deduction for that, or you were an Uber driver or Lyft driver or DoorDash or whatever, and you were parking your car there, conceivably the assessor could have ruled that your home actually was a business property and therefore you would be reassessed. we were actually licking our chops at having that one to be able to talk about during the campaign. However, what they did in the second measure was to say, which I think is even worse, you know, there might be questions of how this works, and therefore we're going to let the legislature answer any questions and solve any concerns. I don't think anybody on this call would want to have the legislature solving all their business decisions, and certainly not when it comes to taxes. So what we have now is a situation where we have a ballot measure that will be on the November ballot for sure. We know who its backers are. So then let's talk about what we've done to address this issue. Well, because we had a year's head start, we created a thing called Protect Proposition 13. And we did polling. We also did 2 million pieces of mail to homeowners that were Democrat and declined to state homeowners. And we received that 2 million pieces of mail, 250,000 signed petitions back saying Protect Prop 13. We don't want to change it. We like it like it is. We also did a lot of educational efforts. We did 7 statewide polls and more than a dozen focus groups. And what we learned is that if we were to make the argument about funding education, we would lose at the polls. Because though people believe education is failing in California, that our kids aren't coming out with a good product, et cetera, they always kind of had that hope that if we give them just a little more money, everything will be okay. So we didn't want to get in that debate. We also learned that most people believe that when you tax business, that tax is going to get passed on to consumers, and that homeowners believe that if you created split roll tax, they were going to be next. So the lessons we took away from there is that we needed to concentrate on Proposition 13, which is what we did, that we needed to make our campaign about protecting Prop 13, which we've done, and move forward from there. So who are the opponents? Who's on this team? Well, it's a huge array of teams. The committee itself, Californians to Stop Higher Property Taxes, by the way, the name of our official name now is Californians to Protect Proposition 13 and Stop Higher Property Taxes. That's a mouthful. It has on it the chamber, the realtors, the restaurant association, the retailers, NFIB, small businesses, and on and on and on. And also it has the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, which is the group that protects Proposition 13 and homeowners in California. So we have a steering committee. We also then have an executive committee, makes all the decisions about how we move forward, approves all the press releases, expenditures, et cetera. That executive committee consists of Alan Zarenberg from the California Chamber of Commerce, Rob Lapsley from the California Business Roundtable, Rob Gutierrez from the California Taxpayers Association, and yours truly with California Business Properties. And believe me, we are a very frugal group, but we also know exactly what we need to do. So most recently, what we've done is started to roll out opposition. Our main effort will begin once we know what the number is going to be. And right now, we do not yet know what that number is. We won't know probably until the last week of June or the first week of July. And then we'll start a full board campaign, vote no on Proposition 16, whatever. We were concerned that because you can diddle with this kind of stuff, that the ballot measure that was voted on in March of this year, which was called Prop 13, would be named something else, and they would make our ballot measure number 13. So it would have forced us to say, vote no on Protect Prop 13, vote no on Prop 13, which would have been a bit of a nightmare. Fortunately, they used that up, so we don't have to worry about that. We've hired the team that was part of the No on Proposition 10 campaign, the rent control measure, in 2018. They were also the people who ran the No on EE campaign in Los Angeles. That was a partial tax measure that was supported by everybody, the mayor, the unions, the city council, et cetera, and was polling in mid-60s, and they were shooting for a 2/3 vote. We were concerned that they would reach that 2/3 vote. We started our No campaign.
campaign. It's a good campaign.
The trials and tribulations of working from home
Exactly.
and the joys of having a pet.
Rex, I have a question if you don't mind me interrupting.
Oh, absolutely.
So we have a question.
Thanks, Barry.
We have a question from Melanie Bamba. Rex, do you believe that this will eventually extend to residential properties as well as commercial?
Well, absolutely. The proponents of the split roll tax measure made no qualms about the fact that each and one of their organizations has called for eliminating Proposition 13 in California in its entirety. So we know this is just the first step, and that's part of what we'll be campaigning on, that today, business properties, tomorrow your home. So that's absolutely true. So what is our goal here? What have we done? We've been raising, we've done, like I said, over 12 focus groups and 7 statewide polling. We're going to be doing another poll very shortly to determine what impact has the COVID-19 pandemic had on voters' attitudes as it relates to this. Because as you know, school districts are saying, oh, wow, we're short of money. We really need to have assistance now. We need it more than ever. And they also have continued to move their messaging from one target to another. So we want to be able to address that. And as we started to say before the dogs jumped out, we started rolling out our different opposition groups. So we first announced the fact that agriculture in California has come out strongly opposed to this. The proponents say it doesn't impact agriculture. Well, that's myth number one. It doesn't impact agriculture where you grow your tomatoes or your hay, but it does impact agriculture if you have vineyards, if you have peach trees or cherry trees or almond trees. It also impacts your packing facilities, if you have facilities where you keep your equipment, all of that kind of stuff would be reassessed. So agriculture has put out some things where if it were to pass, it's going to have a significant impact on the cost of food in California. And because California is the food basket for the rest of the country, this means we're going to have higher prices for food everywhere in the country. So agriculture is solid on board. We then rolled out the opposition of a number of social groups. The NAACP at the state level, all of its local chapters, the Black Chamber of Commerce, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the Hispanic 100, and on. Groups have come out in opposition to it. Willie Brown, some of you recognize that name, wrote an op-ed piece in opposition to this measure, and that's going to continue. We've also now rolled out the largest gathering of veterans groups ever to get involved in the ballot measure, and they've joined us in opposition to us. And very shortly, we're going to roll out a list of current and past Democrat legislators who are opposed to this measure, because this is a measure which has opposition from all over the place. So I think I've gone over who the campaign team is, what the measures are, who the backers are, and now I want to talk about fundraising. Campaigning in California is very, very expensive because the proponents, even though they aren't polling very well, believe this is the time for them to strike. We're going to see them putting a full court press on this. What does that mean? Well, the November election, folks believe there'll be a huge anti-Trump electorate turnout in California. They also believe that with mail ballots going out to everybody, there'll be a whole lot of people that are going to be participating, don't even know what's going on. They also believe that with ballot harvesting continuing in California and with the same-day voter registration, they believe that the dynamics of the elections have changed such to their benefit that even though they're polling low, they'll be able to win. But that means we have to be a very effective campaign, and we can't just use the traditional methods of doing some mail and think we're going to be okay. So we have a full-blown social media, radio media, and TV media campaign. In California, we have the most expensive media markets anywhere in the country. So we're looking at a $70 million campaign in order to do what we'd like to do. We have $35 million of that already either in the bank or in pledges. So we're halfway to our goal. They have a much easier time. They don't have to ask people. I have to go and I have to ask Melanie, and I have to ask Amber, and I have to ask each and every one of you, would you please contribute? They don't. They simply open up their checkbook at the California Teachers Association office and write a check. They merely open up their checkbook at the different SEIU offices and write a check. By the way, the third largest donor to this campaign on the side of the CTA and the SEIU is someone you all know and love. It's the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation, or Facebook. They've given several millions of dollars, and we anticipate them giving more. You might go, why would Facebook care about this? Well, Facebook wants to continue to curry favor with progressives in California, and they want to have favor with the teachers union and the SEIU so that they'll have allies when they have challenges facing them. And quite candidly, you go, oh, well, won't they have to pay increased property taxes? Yeah, they will. But you know, when your amount of money comes in the total billions, you know, paying a couple $1 million more in property taxes isn't a big deal. But our polling and our economic studies have shown us that it is going to be a big deal for thousands and thousands and thousands of small businesses and thousands of smaller property owners. A lot of properties in California are owned by families or a husband and wife who use that as their retirement income or whatever, and they're suddenly going to find themselves with a tax bill that may be 3, 4, 2 times bigger they've been paying in the past, and they don't have the resources to do that. Smaller, you know, we're at triple net leases in California. Some tenants are going to be, you know, challenged very greatly by this. So the fact of the matter is, the Ledge Analyst Office of the state of California has said we'll lose as much as 150,000 jobs should this measure pass. I think that's probably on the low side, but I'm satisfied to talk about that number. The economic dislocation is one which will be felt for years. And again, as I pointed out at the beginning of this, there's no guarantee of where this money is going to go to improve education or improve services at local government. It's just basically a blank check to go forward and move the dollars their direction. Were there any other questions that have come in?
Yes, we have one. Has the governor of California taken a position on the split roll measure yet?
The governor of California has not taken a position on the split roll ballot measure yet. During the campaign for governor, he was the first person ever running for governor of California that said he supported the concept of split roll tax. Since that time, he has said that if they were going to have a split roll tax approach in California, it needed to be part of a comprehensive approach to tax reform in our state. So I do not believe that he'll get involved in this, particularly if we can keep the polling pressure on. I don't think he'd want to jump in and support a losing measure. But right now he's not made any statements. And when asked about it most recently during his daily briefings on COVID-19, the most he said was that it is a measure that's on the ballot and people should look at it, period.
Okay. We have another question. Can you confirm this needs 2/3 approval by the voters?
I cannot confirm that because it doesn't. It only needs 50% plus 1 vote. The 2/3 rule applies to when the legislature or local governments are passing taxes. At the state level, you can do any of these with a 50% plus 1 vote.
Wow. Okay.
And the next question, I saw just popped up here, so I'll go ahead and read it, Amber, if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, we have a roll already of several hundred local government officials from cities and counties around the state and mayors who have come out in opposition to Proposition 13. And we believe that's going to continue to grow, and we'll be using them as spokespersons throughout the campaign as well. The other side also has people supporting it. Certainly the City Council of Board of Supervisors and City Council of San Francisco has already taken a support position. The City of Berkeley has already taken a support position, and on and on and on. So they have their proponents in local government as we have ours. So the League of Cities has not taken a position as of yet. And we're not really sure where the league or CSAC would end up on a measure like this. Can tell you this, that the county assessors, who are the folks who will have to be implementing this measure, have come out strongly against it and joined our opposition effort just last week. And by the way, the county assessors went through and said, you know what, this is going to impact how we do our job in California. And it's going to cost roughly, just to implement it, over $1 billion statewide the first time, and as much as $400 to $500 million each year to implement it. And so the assessors for the last 40 years have strictly had to push a button on their computer and they get the new charge of what your tax is going to be. Now they're going to have to hire assessors. They're going to hire staff for those assessors. They're going to have to hire judges. They're going to have to hire reviewers. And it's just a huge, huge nightmare. And so they've come out strongly opposed to this in saying that it just will not work, and are encouraging people to vote no on it. Were there some more that came in, Amber?
Yes, there are. From Sonia Miro, what buildings will be exempt from this bill, assuming city, state, and federal are not taxed? Do you anticipate any hardship claims allowed for this if this passes?
You're right. Government public buildings aren't going to be taxed. And they have put what I refer to as a smoke and mirrors exemption in their measure, which says if your property has a value of $3 million or less, it won't be reassessed. But they then qualify that by saying if you own more than one property and the combined value of those two properties is $3 billion or more, you will be assessed and get reassessed. Then they build in this fakey little process that the $3 million can move up to the cost of living, but I think we all know that sometimes property values exceed the cost of living in California. So there's really, it's all smoke and mirrors. So hardships, look, we couldn't even get the counties to delay the penalties on us having to pay our property taxes in April during the height of the COVID crisis. And we basically laid out all the scenarios. We begged every single county, and 4 counties gave us an exemption to the first week of May instead of April 12th, and then the penalty kicked in. So the fact of the matter is, I don't see us getting a lot of hardship exemptions. You can, under the process, go down and argue that your property is now devalued. But as I outlined at the very beginning of this, that's going to be even more difficult because you have the burden of proof, not the assessors.
From Melanie Bamba, how often are the proposed reassessments going to take place?
They have to be done within every 3 years, but they can be done more regularly. So it can't be more than 3 years, but it can be done every year. It can be done every other year. So you really don't know with any kind of certainty, what the property tax is you're going to be paying next year.
Wow. From Craig Benedetto. So for the sake of argument, if this loses, given we have to deal with this issue every other election cycle, is there any way to put this to rest?
Yes, Craig. The way to put this to rest is to defeat it so badly. They're not going to come back for a generation. As was mentioned before, we've been able to stop this several times over the last few years before it got this far. And I know that if we defeat this soundly, it will be a long time before we bring it back. But, Craig, you know as well as anybody on this call, this is California. And we are the capital of bad ideas. And the bad thing about that isn't that we have bad ideas. It's the fact that there's a lot of people in government who think these are good ideas. And that becomes the problem.
Okay. We have a question from BJ Van Aken. Hi, BJ. How many other states have similar property tax ceilings? What's the norm nationally? Thinking through possible talking points by the opposition.
Well, to compare us with those states, first off, it isn't really, I don't think, the appropriate campaigning that they'll be doing. There are some states that have different methods, and then there's a variety of states that have a weird kind of system whereby there's no property tax. And then others have a very high property tax. Right after Proposition 13 passed in 1978, there was a wave of states across this country who implemented similar Prop 13s in their own states. Most of those are still in place today. So I know that for a fact in Minnesota, there used to be 39 different splits on their roll, including different kind of farms. In other words, if you had a farmer that you had chickens on it, you got your property taxed X way. And if you had a farmer without chickens, you got taxed a different way. So there are some states that have quite convoluted processes. But I kind of don't think their campaign is going to be about what other states are doing. I think their campaign is going to be about our kids are in need, our seniors are in need, our local governments are in need. Business properties are all owned by fat cats, and people aren't doing their fair share for California, and it's time they pay their fair share. This fair share argument is one that they make consistently, and one that really, of course, irritates me no end, because the fact of the matter is that they like to argue that people get out of paying when they get reassessed properties. Well, that is true. There have been a few cases where people not involved in real estate, but oftentimes in the high-tech world, Michael Dell, et cetera, who have bought properties and then hired a bunch of attorneys to go with them and convince the assessors that they didn't have a real change of ownership, and therefore didn't have to pay an increased property tax. We felt this kind of stuff, these scallywags, needed to be stopped. So we went to the legislature a decade ago, and we found the most liberal member of the assembly, a person who had said he wanted to nuke Proposition 13, a person from San Francisco, and we asked him to introduce a bill that would end this abusive practice. And so we created a definition, and everybody rallied behind that in the assembly, including all the folks that are now supporting split roll tax. And we all sat at the same table, and we all supported the bill, and the bill moved out of the assembly without opposition and was over in the Senate side. And then lo and behold, the proponents, SEIU and CTA, said, wait a second, if we fix this, we won't be able to argue in campaign pieces that people are abusing and not paying their fair share. So the people who went from supporting it joined the opposition and killed the bill on the Senate side. And we've introduced this bill 4 more times since then, and every year they blocked it in committee because they don't want to fix the problem. They want to be able to use this as a fake argument in their campaign materials. And to do that, they've cost local government, probably over the years, a couple hundreds of millions of dollars. And they don't really care because it's all about their goal of breaking Proposition 13.
Okay, we have a question from Thor Emblem. Do these small business protections assume that every small business owns their business property? Aren't there a lot of businesses that lease space from large businesses, and wouldn't they be negatively affected by this?
Yeah, they will be. You're absolutely right. I mean, the question is going to be for landlords, how big is that tax hit? Am I able to pass this on to the rest of the tenants that I have? Are there tenants who won't be able to survive if I pass it on? How do I address that? And so the fact of the matter is that this is an anti-small business measure. And that's why NFIB is part of our coalition fighting it.
Okay. Craig's chiming in. I think this might be rhetorical. So do we move to another state? Any preferences?
Craig.
Another one from Thor Emblem. Some states have higher property tax, but no income tax. Is it a trade-off?
That's true that some do. I think it would have to depend upon what you would look at those particular states. I mean, I don't have the state chart here in front of me, so it's hard to say, okay, I pay a 5% property tax, I don't have an income tax, or I pay an income tax, or I pay an income tax and I don't pay a property tax. It's, you know.
You saw Rockin' the World when
Somebody's on, should be on mute, they're not. Thank you.
I think we're good.
Any other questions?
Yes, we have one from Barry Garson. Are there plans to combat this and make sure the public knows the other side? Do you think news media will allow for some time to discuss? Are there plans to start reaching out to media outlets to do this? Mainly to speak to someone in terms of how it would negatively affect things we all use.
Well, that'll be part of the campaign. Once we know what the number is, we'll be doing full-bore campaign, which will be meeting with editorial boards, traveling up and down and doing speeches and whatnot, which is what I was doing prior to this whole COVID-19 thing. And, you know, we'll have to buy ads. I think there'll be a lot of editorial boards in the state that will oppose it. There will be a lot of editorial boards in the state that'll think it'd be a good idea. I would assume that, that the Berkeley Bar will endorse this measure. We will be speaking out everywhere and spinning our message both on small businesses, both on its impact on consumers, and on and on and on.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I can see for now, unless anyone wants to have any more questions or discussions for us. Oh, we have one more.
What can you do locally? Barry, first off, you let the dogs out. And then, Barry, you after you do that, you start raising money. But most important thing is talking to your friends, talking to your neighbors, because most people don't understand what this measure is all about. And that's really, really important. That message from a grassroots person to a neighbor, to somebody in the Rotary Club with them, to somebody at church, to somebody that they surf with, is really important. So that's what you can do first and foremost. Secondly, you can donate to the campaign. I know we'll put something up here about that momentarily. But I also, if you don't mind, Amber, I'd
Sure.
like to chat briefly about a major challenge we're facing in the legislature, SB 939. I'm sure all of you heard about this measure. SB 939 is a measure that would abrogate every lease in the state of California. Abrogate's a big word for basically negate it. It won't count. As if it never existed. And not only does it do that, but then it says your tenants can stay in your space for a year and not have to pay when they decide to leave. This is insanity. Believe it or not, the senator who's supporting it, the senator who introduced it, Scott Wiener out of San Francisco, believes it's the right thing to do because he believes in his mind there are some bad actors, and so he needs to do this. So we've said, Senator, there's some bad actors and you want to abrogate every lease in the state of California. Does that make any sense to you? And to him, it does. But you know, one pill makes you larger and one pill makes you small. And obviously he's had both of those. The fact of the matter is we put together a very significant coalition opposition to this measure. It is going to be held and heard in Senate appropriations on Thursday. You all can go to stopsb939.com. I believe it's going to be on your little chat area, but you can do that. You can hit a letter. You can send a tweet. Tweets are good if you do tweets because that's a public shaming of the legislator saying, hey, this is something that's bad for business. This is something that's bad for our communities. Here's what's going to happen. If you abrogate every lease in California and the tenants can stay there for a year, guess what's going to happen? There's going to be so many foreclosures. Banks are going to own the property. Counties are going to own the properties. And we all remember when they owned the homes in California during the last recession, what happened? They became run down. Neighborhoods became run down. Blight returned. All of these things. It's a nightmare. And let me tell you, this measure has got to be stopped. So please take a moment and go to that webpage. Click that message to send a letter. Click that message to send a tweet. Let your legislator know. Let Ben Hueso know that this is really bad. Let Tony Atkins know this is really bad. We have a big lobbying team up in Sacramento. We're already communicating with them, but nothing is more important for them to hear than it is to hear from you guys because you're the local folks that make the things happen for them. Brian Jones is already a no, so reinforce him. Say, Brian, thanks for your opposing SB 939. So that's what I wanted to say about 939. I really appreciate that opportunity to do that as well.
So I see that Melanie already posted the link for Stop SB 939, as well as the stophigherpropertytaxes.org for donations. Rex, do you want to speak a little bit to the effect of how much this campaign will cost for split roll?
Well, as I mentioned, it's about a $70 million campaign. We've raised and have pledges now for $35 million. So we have $35 million more to raise. They can do it a lot easier than we can. We have to ask folks. And as I mentioned before, they just write checks out of their PACs that are fed by their dues check off from their union membership. Or Mr. Zuckerberg coughs and $1 million comes their way. So that's what we're dealing against. So, but let me tell you, small donations, big donations, it doesn't matter. Everything will help in this cause. But I want to again stress how important that person-to-person communication is, letting people know, hey, I'm involved in this industry, and it's going to be a nightmare if this happens.
Absolutely.
And you guys have been so good down there already. BOMA, San Diego has been a great leader on so many fronts, on so many efforts over the years. And I do shout outs to any number of your faces if I could see all of you. But I know Craig and Tom and Amber, all of you guys have been great. I know I'm missing somebody, and Thor, I appreciate working with all of you, and thanks for what you're doing.
And I just want to give a shout out right now, excuse me, to RSI Roofing, who made a $5,000 donation toward the split roll campaign. So we really appreciate their generous donation.
Yes.
So hopefully others can continue that generous donation spirit. Let's see, I think we have a couple other questions here. From Barry Garson, do you think COVID impacts this at all or no?
I don't think so. If anything, I think it affects it negatively in the sense that small businesses are just now, well, they were just starting to recover. We had another series of problems and challenges. So small businesses are going to still be struggling to recover. Jobs are still going to be reduced from what they were before. There's still going to be a lot of significant restraints on what we do or don't do. And I think people are going to say, maybe this isn't the time to do it. The biggest property tax increase in the history of our state. At least I hope not. Uh-oh. I think it's Amber who's frozen.
Yeah, we're still here.
Hi, Thor.
Hello.
Thor, you want to wrap us up?
Barry, thank you for the thank you.
Okay, never mind. Thank you again, Rex, for your time. We would like to thank our annual supporting partners for putting this on, and thank you everyone for your time today. We hope you'll go and donate to both that cause and sign that 939 thing.
And hang on one second. To answer the question that just popped up here, we will be working to develop things that could be sent to tenants. So yes, great question and great idea, because communicating to your tenants is really, really important. So thank you for that question.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Rex.
Bye-bye, everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe.